Wow, that was a great podcast interview. I cannot wait for it to go live so I can share it with my community. This is the sentence that we all want to hear from our guests, right? This is a pretty good indicator of how the interview's energy was and if the guest is going to be sharing it with their community or not, right? We want that interview to be bingeable for us, but also on the other side. And what comes next is what is the secret to creating conversations that lead to great podcast interviews that turn into fantastic social media resources that in turn create a lot of buzz online? That is what I'm going to be talking with my guest, Kendall Breitman. She has 10 years of experience working in television and production for places like NBC, Bloomberg News, and also Politico. In a nutshell, she's interviewed both prominent political figures and also regular people that have absolutely no media experience. So now Kendall is a member of the Riverside FM team, and that's actually where I record all the podcast interviews. And I've been following Kendall for a while and just seeing what she's been talking about production, and I was like, oh my gosh, everything she shares, I haven't really heard in any other places. So I was like, Kendall, let's have you on the show. I think that my community really wants to hear your tips. So that's what we did. And as former journalists, both Kendall and I talk about like our really practical tips to ace interviews in the moment, how to set the scene if your guest is a little nervous, but also why you need to ditch the long list of questions. In case we haven't met, hi, I'm Anna Xavier. I'm the founder of the Podcast Space, a practical podcast that is here to elevate your podcast journey and get you unstuck. All right, this podcast is filled with nuggets, so make sure that you have a notebook by your side and also that you let us know of your takeaways. I cannot wait to hear your ahas, and let's get into it. Hi, Kendall. I'm so excited to have you on the show. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So let's talk about best practices in how can we guide our guests and your favorite tips and tricks on how to do that, how to get someone comfortable and really being the best guest they can be.
Yeah, so I would say first off, my big recommendation to people, especially if you're doing podcast interviews, is I like to instead of calling it the pre-interview, I call it the green room conversation.
Oh,
And so it's almost the same type of thing, but back when I was working in TV, a part of my job is that I would go into the green room beforehand and really just talk to people before they go out onto set. And it made this huge difference. Just getting somebody in a conversation. Because can you imagine like you're going from kind of just silently sitting in a chair and then saying, oh, you're going on TV. So it was about going and speaking with them, loosening them up. It's like it kind of comes from this principle that I had learned in a language class that it takes 15 minutes of speaking in a specific language for your brain to like really click into that language and for it to become a little bit more seamless when you're starting a conversation. So the idea is rather than like kind of having this a little bit more of a formal pre-interview, what would you like me to say? What would you like me to ask? Those types of things. I would even just press record and then just tell them we're gonna start this whenever, but like let's just start having a conversation. How are you doing today? Like the way that you set up your tone in that way, like if you're more playful, if you're more casual, if you're more serious, your guest will adapt to that tone and then it flows a lot more easily. And so it kind of flows into more of a natural conversation rather than let's meet for the pre-interview and then we're going to start recording now. So trying to take away, like even when I'm saying press record before, because even in those 5 seconds where you have a countdown to press record, people kind of sit up a bit straighter, they get a little bit more nervous. So it's really just about making people feel like they're in a conversation. So that's my first tip is kind of this green room outlook versus this pre-interview, which is really like they're almost synonyms of each other, but it's really just about a mindset of how to get somebody comfortable.
Before we move into the second one, I just want to make a mention. I loved everything that you said. It's just obviously it makes sense. And also when you're talking about that you learn it at a language class, like I feel like we speak multiple languages in some way, right? Like our professional language, and then we go into our like relaxed language, and we are just pull energy from one another. So if you're, very serious and, you're just kind of like really on the ball, or if you're kind of a little bit more like goofy, like the guest is going to pick up on that energy. So also being very intentional from the hosting standpoint, like what are you exuding? That's something for one to consider. But also like most times you're talking to a stranger, so it's expected that you build that rapport somehow before the interview. We kind of forget that it's like, no, like, hey, you don't start talking to someone on the street. Well, actually, maybe in America people are so friendly. But yeah, like you can't expect someone to just like be the best, like most comfortable self with a stranger. So just kind of like let's remember that a little bit.
Exactly. I mean, if you think about it, so like let's say that a podcast is like an event. So imagine like when you come into a room where you don't know people, for the first 15 minutes, it's a little bit like, okay, how should I act? Maybe I'll go grab a drink and then meet somebody. Like you're a little bit more uptight. And so this kind of idea, it's like it's it's understanding that those 15 minutes do exist and using those 15 minutes rather than saying, here are my questions, just diving into a conversation. Because then the conversation is going to flow and then they don't need to know like in a regular conversation, I'm not sitting down with a friend and saying, okay, so we're first going to talk about how your work is going. And then we're going to move on into like it ends up making it flow a bit better just by having those 15 minutes that are just about establishing a rapport rather than establishing what your interview is going to be about.
That was a great first tip. Let's dive into more because I'm already like, oh my gosh, like tell us more, Kendall. These are great.
Yeah, so okay, let me think of like this is in no particular order rather than the order that they pop into my head. So I'm just going to be transparent with that. I will say that when I first started journalism, I had to watch, I won't say which anchors, but I had to watch a few anchors that my bosses don't really love their interview style. And so what that really taught me is that basically what they were trying to teach me at that time as I listened is we've all been watching or listening to interviews where you're just almost like screaming at the phone or at your like compute wherever you're watching and you're like why did they not ask that follow-up, and 9 times out of 10 it's because that person has a list of questions. And I'm not saying don't have a list of questions. It's always good to have that on you, but I would keep it more open. So ask the question, and then sometimes if you have that list, it kind of feels like a sharp turn after we like if I were to finish up this question, you're like, great, so let's talk about it. It feels less like a conversation and more like talking points.
Yeah.
So I would go in, yeah, with an idea of like a few questions that you want to ask, but really, and I know this sounds like listen to what your guest is saying back to you and then follow up on those points. And really easy ways to follow up can be, I noticed you use this word, like kind of character setting questions. I noticed you use the word passion. Why did you use that word? Like, let's talk about why you chose that. And it makes people know who your guests are better. It gives them an idea of how your guest thinks, but also it makes the conversation flow better. Instead of kind of having these questions, I would, this is now 3, recommend something that we used to do on TV. It's like, I would recommend to guests to have 5 bullet points. And the idea here is, or 3 to 5, 5 can be a little bit overwhelming. But the idea here is that like, you can talk and then tangent off. And these bullet points are just there to like snap you back. So you write down 3 to 5 bullet points. And if at one point you're like, where did I trail here? Take a bullet point and snap it back to what your points are. And it's a really great way to guide the conversation. So that's kind of a 2-for-1. It's the bullet points, but also like really listening and then following up, because I think that this is a really great tip that I had gotten, which is you as a host are there to ask questions for your listener. You're not there to ask your questions particularly. So what that means is that your listener, to get the best interview, you have to be thinking, if I'm just listening to this for the first time, what's my follow-up question? What are people wondering about that? And then those create the best conversations.
Yes, and love. And I'm even thinking as the host, so many things are happening. You're trying to engage with the guest, to sound confident, to think about like what are my points overall.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you were talking earlier about the when you're kind of like guiding the conversation, thinking about like follow-up questions. I think really because I feel like my audience sometimes says things like, oh, but I was thinking about the follow-up questions so hard that I forgot to listen what the guest was saying. So for people who
Hmm.
go down exactly on the opposite end, when they like immediately shut down, I was like, what am I gonna go? And there's like 2 minutes went by and they're like, I'm not listening. What is a good tip for people to stay in the moment?
I would say that having like a kind of notebook is powerful so that you're not kind of. Sometimes I feel like we will listen to, like, we'll have an idea and then you just kind of in your head are like, remember this idea, remember this idea. Having like a quick kind of like notebook. This is why I really love these reporters' notebooks that are like really tiny in your
Yes.
hand. You could just kind of write it down. And I would recommend doing that. But then that's also what the bullet points are for. Those are there to like save you. So that's why I also say to have your questions in case that moment happens. But I think that even like I think that sometimes character setting questions as follow-ups are powerful and that they're forgotten sometimes because they're not seen as particularly like a meatier question. So for example, asking like, and take me back to that moment. How did you feel at that moment? Like, what were you even saying, were you nervous? Were you excited? Like, the follow-up can be setting more of the scene for the character being your guest. So there are some like tried and true, such as the examples that I just gave, that can really be a follow-up for questions. So for example, when you were just saying that, I can say like, yeah, and how do you feel? How do you manage when you feel overwhelmed when your guest is speaking and you don't have the next question? It's almost just like if you're struggling for something, then ask them about emotion because it pays off twofold. One, then you have a question and you don't feel like you're kind of scrambling. And two, it really connects your listener to your guest.
Oh, I love these. Connect back to emotion. And if anything, as sometimes as we try to create the best possible interview, we forget that this is just a conversation with between two humans. And I love that going back to the emotion because it's just like basic nature in a way, right? Like we bring down our walls in a way because like it's about how I felt. It's not like you're not almost like not rationalizing an answer. You're just like, yeah, like how did I feel? Feels like more natural to tap into that, I guess.
Exactly. And like it makes the person think. So it's not like, oh, this is my answer that I had prepared. It's more like, well, if I were to go back to how I feel then, it makes somebody be a little bit more vulnerable, open up a bit more. And then as we were saying before, it's like you're strangers sometimes, and you want to create this kind of colloquial friendship type of thing. So that is what a friend would ask you. If you're saying like, oh, I developed this new method to do X, your friend would be like, oh my gosh, that sounds overwhelming or crazy. Like, how did you manage to do that? Like, it makes people feel less like they're in a job interview, next question, and more like they're speaking to somebody in a casual conversation.
I guess it only makes sense to do question, question, question if you are going to be editing the podcast anyway and you have some voiceover in between and all you need is almost like sound bites. But at the same
Hmm.
time, would you agree they're kind of like, and or not, that you're missing out on building that personal connection when you're just like, there's other questions, these are the answers, there's no room for like engagement and going off script?
Yeah, well, that's the difference between I feel TV and podcasting. So with the beauty of podcasting is that like it's nice to have these sound bites. Those are great for marketing and those are great for promoting your podcast. But the thing is that the reason people love the medium of podcasting is because they get to hear from people in a much more extended format. So like they want to hear when you're watching a news interview, you want to hear people's points because that's what you're expecting from a news interview. You want to hear, okay, this is how I feel about X. How do you respond to Y? So and so said this. What is your response to that? And then creating these news clips from there. But when you're in a podcast interview, like really the beauty of it is that people are like going through their day with you in their ear and they just want to hear a conversation. So I would focus more on the conversation and less on the questions. But that would also lead me to how to like kind of craft some good questions
Let's
if I can
go.
go into there. Let's do it. So I'd say like for questions, trying to find a new angle. So for example, rather than saying, what's your favorite part of like here, what's your favorite part of podcasting? Maybe like turn it on its head. So like, what do you think that most podcasters are getting wrong? And it doesn't have to be negative. It's just then they can turn into a positive. I love when podcasts do X. It's almost taking a question and writing kind of like sometimes what I would do is I would write the normal question, like the kind of lowest hanging fruit question. And then I'd branch out from there. So if this was the example, what do you love about podcasting? It can be where would you be able to trace back the first time that you feel like you started getting excited about podcasting? Um, what was your like a funny one? Like what was your I'm just spitballing here. Like what was your first job and how did it prepare you for podcasting? Like my first job was at an ice cream shop. I can like it'd be fun to talk like that's a fun and then you learn more about me, you know?
Oh, and hang
Or
on, before I move forward,
yeah.
there's something that I just remembered, and that is that a lot of the media are actually clipping bits from podcasts and putting it on TV because the host asks questions that most journalists wouldn't, or the guest is just more relaxed because they're like, it's fine, celebrities and whatnot. So there's a good angle to really think about outside the box because even the media are doing that
Yeah.
now. So,
Yeah. And then you make new points. Like everybody's asking you about this, but actually, like, tell me about your hometown. Like trying to get like the podcasts are such a really, like, they're just a really cool way to really dive into conversations that you wouldn't be able to dive into otherwise. Like, I've got to be honest, I am a pop culture fanatic. I love reality TV and pop culture. And I love listening to these podcasts on pop culture because I feel like I know the people better after hearing them. Because the more that people, there's just, I think that we're in a really like beautiful time of podcasting where it's popular, but it's not like TV where you're sitting in the back, you've gotten your hair and your makeup done, and you're worried, like you need to say the right thing because you know that that clip is going to be played over and over again. People are a bit looser on podcasts because that's the medium. And so capitalizing that on that with questions. So really I think that a good method is writing kind of the lowest hanging fruit question and then making a web off of it. So what I was just saying, like, how did your first job prepare you for podcasting? What's the funny, like, what's like a skill that you never knew that you would have developed from podcasting or, like that kind of thing that like really ask questions that people aren't asking.
yes, I love that. And especially as a host, you have to, and again, take it from two ladies who were journalists at some point, like you're not expected to be the journalist, so be a human and ask human
Exactly.
questions. And I have some people that I interviewed on a podcast or they were guests on someone else's podcast when I was producing them in studios. And I remember like I would sometimes become besties because we would have these like just normal conversations, and it just took the whole like relationship to a different level because I wasn't there like either, trying to be very like serious or whatever. People were just like, oh, this is a human that I can connect with on a human level. Therefore, I'm bringing my guard down. I'm enjoying the conversation more. And like you're doing a podcast, so much of it as a small business owner is to really use these connections and nurture them for the rest of your time in the industry. So it's super important to make the most out of these conversations and make sure that you're clicking with people on a natural level, not like on a professional level, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I was also actually thinking about this while you were just saying that. It's the idea that like people, I'm talking a lot about guests and how guests can feel more comfortable and that people can connect to guests, but you also want them to connect to you as a host. And so I would even say like, don't be afraid to go off on a side note if it's something that like really is getting you excited. Like speaking of reality TV before, I was on a podcast recently and it came out recently and I was listening back to it because I'm still trying to learn how to be a better guest myself. And I was listening back to it, and it was about social media. And then we suddenly started talking about 90 Day Fiance, one of my favorite shows. And it just was like, it was the funniest part of it was the most, I felt like the funniest part of the podcast. I felt myself like come out more during that. I felt the host kind of got a little bit more electric in that part, and then we're laughing and we're joking, and like we were there to talk about social media, and like said it like you shouldn't make your entire podcast these side notes, but don't be afraid to like really zero in on something that you want to nerd out on or connect with them on, because it really goes a long way in making listeners feel connected to you too.
Yes, and that ties in with something that I wanted to talk to you about, which is how to create like binge-worthy content, and that is one of the tricks, right? Like, or even sound bites. They're really good for social media. I mean, you can connect on a human level with people who also love the 90-Day Fiancé, and again, because you like that, maybe your audience will like that too, and so that clip can go onto social media and craft like a new audience that you were not planning, because again, is it about is it about social media? Not really, but it's about like humanity. Again, always go back to this. So apart from that, what are some tips on creating binge worthy content that like people really want to listen to, apart from these gem that you just shared now?
So I would say, like, I'm going to speak from personal experience. The podcasts that I want to binge are it's the perfect combination between host and topic. So I am thinking about the podcast that I love, and I could there are let's keep going on this reality TV
Yes,
train.
let's
There are a
go.
million there are a million reality TV podcasts. I'm also going to just admit as a personality play that I do even listen to 90 Day Fiancé podcast. This is my guilty pleasure, and no one can stop me. And like, I'll watch a show and listen to a podcast after. It's wild. That's embarrassing. Anyway, there are a
It's like,
million
I'm
of
sorry,
them.
side note. It's like almost like a book club, but better.
Yeah, yeah, but with like ridiculous television. And it's funny to laugh. Like, also, like, no one will, like, my wife will not watch this with me. So it's almost fun to just get to like laugh with my podcast host friend about this, you know? But that's where I'm going to, is that it's a combination of topic, which means that like people need to be interested in your topic, but then it's about connection with the host. I think the best thing that you can do to create a binge-worthy podcast is to be 100% yourself as a host. And I think that means showing your personality, because that's what people want to come back and listen to. There are a million different podcasts to choose from. They can choose whatever they want. But people connect with a person, they connect with a voice, they connect with a personality. And from then, you'll be the podcast that they want to listen to when they go to that topic. So that's my biggest piece of advice. Then like we can talk about social media and how to do like the social media tricks to get people to start tuning in. But I think at its core, the more that you can connect with people, create a community around your podcast, have like these little inside jokes. There's some podcasts I listen to that have like sound effects, inside jokes that they'll like, if something if something is funny, or like there's a podcast that I listen to, it's Everything Iconic by Danny Pellegrino. And whenever something is like a criminal kind of idea, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that she did that, he'll play like the Law and Order SVU, like bum bum. And it's just so funny. And like that makes me want to listen to that, because I feel like an inside joke with the person. So
Yes. Okay, that's good. So yeah, like, but don't overdo sound effects, by the way. If you're
don't overdo
oh
sound
my
effects.
God.
Just as little inside jokes can
Yes.
be funny. But like, I mean more as having like, if there's a phrase that you use, if there's a, there are so many little things that like, if there's a certain thing that you say and your friends know you say it, don't be afraid to say that on your podcast, because it shows who you are.
Yes. Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, do not hinder your personality, because again, like it takes so much energy to be someone else. Like, why do that? So, okay, so one of the things that creates really good social media content, you were about to touch on that. So let's get into that, because so much of it is not just like, oh, let's cut out like good sound bites. Like so much of it is preparing. Like if you can't prepare ahead, and like if there's no substance in the interview, you can't really cut out like binge worthy or like kind of like teasing soundbite. So what are your best tips on how to get that?
So I'm actually gonna like throw in a little surprise here and
Okay.
say I don't always recommend putting your best sound bites onto social. And this is why. And this is going to be
Oh,
controversial. It's like, it's for me, it's kind of like, I mean, you could put some good ones, of course, but like, to me, it's like watching a movie trailer and you've shown me everything that happens in the movie. And I'm like, well, I don't need to go watch it, you know? Like,
yeah.
I like, there are two tricks that I like to do. One is that I think that questions are overlooked and powerful. So something that I actually noticed at first on Call Her Daddy social media. It was just a few clips of her asking different questions and showing the guest. And so it was like, how did you feel when so and so did this? When did you find out that this happened? And then all that it had was like the guest kind of opening their mouth about to answer, and then it cut. And I was
Yes.
like, that is powerful. Like, if you line up your questions and then you show your guest about to answer them, it makes me want to know what the answers to all those questions are, and it makes me want to listen to it. So I would say questions is a good one. There was a community member from Riverside that had done this recently, and I noticed it, and I was like, this is my favorite reel of yours yet. Like, it was
Yes.
really good. Yeah. And so that's one. The other one I would say is cutting, like, not giving everyone the full clip, like not giving, so let's say, like, don't be afraid to cut somebody off mid-sentence. So if somebody's saying, I was doing this and then I changed, I moved over to this and that's when everything changed, like, cut it there.
You know,
It's give them something to want and give them a reason to go off of Instagram or TikTok and go to wherever you're hosting your podcast.
yes. Someone who does this very well is, I think, Stephen Bartlett. I can't get his name, like The Diary of a CEO. His
Hmm.
podcast is the only one that I will watch a trailer on social. I'm like, don't watch this show. And his show is super long, but he does exactly that, or his team. They do exactly that. They're like, and it's when, or like, man, I never cried in an interview. Like Gary Vee going like, and I was
Exactly.
like, oh, what did he ask? And I was like,
Why did he
don't
cry in the
talk.
interview? If you can create a clip that makes you at the end have a question, that's the best thing that you can do. So like, if it's, whether that's lining up a bunch of questions and then having them say like what are the answers? If it's, why did he cry in the studio? Like, having those little moments is that's where I think that the magic really happens when it comes to clips.
Yes.
Don't give it all away. Make them listen,
Yeah,
Don't
don't
give all the
spoil
best
it.
moments. Yeah, no spoilers, please.
Yes. Exactly. That's a good practice. All right. So I'm just going through kind of like our ideas. What are your thoughts on, people who freeze? Like have you ever had like someone that you were either preparing for an interview or like you were getting ready to be part of an interview and, someone froze, or like someone getting in a wild state that you're like, "Oh my gosh, this was such an unexpected situation, and how did you overcome it?"
So you mean freeze as in like they kind of freeze up a bit?
Yeah, like they're literally like, I don't know what to
Yeah.
say." And they're like halfway through the interview, which either cannot be edited or I guess let's talk about like what you did.
So I would say that if this is, I don't like, I'm trying to think of, because this might upset people, but if you're feeling like the interview isn't great, I don't always think you need to post it.
Yeah.
Like, your audience comes first, and your listeners, and it kind of goes back to your brand. And if I've listened to podcasts and I thought that the interview was like kind of sloppy, and I didn't listen to another episode. Like, I thought that maybe that the guest wasn't like really, like, when people are listening. There was a time where back when I was working at Bloomberg, I wrote a mistake into a teleprompter. And then they said the mistake on air and it went off. And then during the commercial break, the host was not very happy with me. And I was in the control room. And he made it a point of like, I know that this wasn't me, but it looks like me when I'm the one on TV presenting it and promoting it, which is true. And I think that the same goes with guests. It's like, if somebody freezes up, I don't think that you need to particularly post that, because you owe more to your listeners than you do, and to yourself than you do to that guest. And that might not be the most comfortable situation, but I think that that would be it. I think that, like, with editing, you can also just take a moment to be like, hey, let's like reset, like don't be afraid if you're recording to just take a moment and be like, let's reset for a bit. I feel like, we need to loosen up a bit. Like, don't be afraid to kind of just call it out and
Yes. You know what?
try to figure it out.
My favorite trick that I want everyone to take is that you pretend that you did something stupid and you have to re-record it. And you like,
That's really good.
yes, because like it takes the wedge off. You're like, like you relate to, you become human, and the person is like, oh, it wasn't on me. Even though in their head, at some point, they're like, oh my gosh, that was a terrible answer. You'd be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I accidentally kept hitting the table, and this is gonna be picked up. And then the guest is like, oh, we both messed up, haha. And then you can like redo it. I'm so sorry. Let's do it again. Or then like blame your editor. Like, oh my gosh, there was this thing in my camera and my editor did, or like my producer didn't do it, like something like that. Just blame the invisible producer. So just
That's
like,
really smart.
yeah, because again, it's all about like making the person feel excited to be there. And even though in their head they're like, oh, I'm messing it up, they're just like, oh, they messed it up too. Ha ha. It's all good. So
I actually want to jump on that with like two more little like tips, and this might like one of them was when I was on TV, it was like a compliment sandwich type of thing. It's like this is going really well, like get a little bit closer to the mic so we could hear you better, but like really great answer. It's like you give a compliment, give one little piece of advice, and then a compliment again. It really helps people. And another one is a 1-to-2 rule, and that means 1 to 2 notes that you give people. So like this is mostly for video, and so we'd say like, hey, sit for the next take. It's a little bit different in podcasting, but like sit up a little bit straighter and get a little bit closer to the mic. Stop it there. Otherwise, if you say, and I'd love if you can mention this and do that. If somebody starts to get 3-4 notes, all of them are gone. So take your most important 2 if you're going to give any notes, and give that, and then I'd wait like a couple more minutes and then throw in the other note or 2, but 1 to 2 notes at a time max.
Perfect. Great idea. All right. Well, actually, does Riverside actually have like the checklist for the shows?
Yes, we do. And I will say that one is a bit more, so it's a bit technical, like how to, like with your Google Chrome browser and things like that. That is in our community group, but I will also give a little preview to your listeners that I'm starting a initiative with the community as community manager. I am teaming up with different creators to create guides for the community by the community. So what does that mean? We have templates for emails on post booking. There are how to launch your podcast checklists. There's how to monetize checklists. I just made one for guest checklist. That's like a simple one. Have water, wear headphones, that type of thing. But we're creating, basically the idea is you can watch 1 million YouTube videos, listen to 1 million podcasts, but it kind of distills information down into guides. And so watch this space, because we're going to be releasing them October, and it's going to be an ongoing kind of project, and we'll hopefully all be able to really learn from each other and use those guides to send to guests and to use for ourselves.
Awesome. Okay, that's exciting, and definitely I'll include the link in the show notes as soon. Will that be available on the website in the community part, or do you already know the URL roughly?
That will end up being so we're going to start it in our Facebook community group, and then from there I'm also going to have it available in a Google Drive. So I will give you that, and it'll be organized by different topics, different parts of the podcasting process. So definitely check out that link, and then eventually it'll go to live on our website. But we like to just get things out, and
you figure out
get things to people, because it's iterative in that way, like see how people are consuming it, see what's helpful, and then make it as respond to that, make it as helpful as possible for as many people.
Great. Awesome. That's wonderful. And again, we all love free resources and upskilling, and everybody loves a good to-do list, man. Like, we love it. It's
exactly
no-brainer. Just like go through the list, like, got it, check. Oh, not that. No-brainer.
Is there any better feeling than like checking something off of a checklist? I know there are. But It's a really good fit. It's up there. It's up
Yes,
there.
yes, exactly. That kind of like dopamine, like yes.
Yeah, when you just mark it done, you're like, goodbye.
Yes, exactly. Well, Kendall, thank you so much. If anyone wants to reach out to you and talk to you, what's the best way to get in touch?
So, I am on social media. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, Kendall Breitman. I won't try to spell it here.
The
It's
link
on
on the
the
show
show title.
notes.
Yeah, exactly. And you could also send me an email, kendall@riverside.fm. And I really just love to talk with creators and hear more about you, what you're doing. So really reach out and let's chat.
Yeah, that's actually what I did. I think that's how we started talking.
That's how
So,
we met. Yeah, exactly.
um,
So this could be you. I'm kidding.
soundbite. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you
Exactly.
so much for coming on and giving us so many great tips that really, I think, will up level so many podcasts and so many creators will feel confident asking better questions. And also, a lot of happier guests will come out of these interviews, I'm guessing. So thanks so much for coming in. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been really great.
Awesome. And all right, so basically everything that we talked about will be in the show notes. You can easily access this episode and so many more at thepodcastspace.com/podcast. And you can learn about how to create better podcast content. All of our courses are there, also a ton of free resources. And so just make sure that you subscribe to the podcast. And we have a bi-weekly newsletter too. So, hey, if you just wanted to receive everything on your newsletter, do that at thepodcastspace.com. I'll see you in the next episode. And until there, just keep creating content that's imperfect but moves you forward. Bye.